Ces deux qualités de parlementaire du Sénégal, mais aussi parlementaire ouest-africain, qu'il est ici. Il nous fait l'honneur de présider cette cérémonie d'ouverture. Je voulais seulement vous le présenter avant de lui passer la parole pour diriger cette table. Merci.
L'occasion de dire que le président de l'Assemblée nationale du Sénégal, le président Mamadou Seck, nous a fortement recommandé de venir en masse participer à votre atelier si important. Malheureusement, nous avons aujourd'hui une plénière à l'Assemblée nationale, et ce qui explique effectivement son absence au niveau de votre atelier. Vous savez, c'est toujours un plaisir que le parlementaire a, surtout avec Enda Tiers-monde, de venir participer à ces travaux. Et l'occasion est toujours rêvée pour pouvoir partager donc avec les différentes expertises qui sont ici présentes. Nous vous saluons nous tous au nom et du Parlement de la CEDEAO, qui est l'espace communautaire qui regroupe l'ensemble donc des 15 États de la CEDEAO, et au nom du Parlement du Sénégal. Je donne donc la parole au docteur Dieye pour son mot d'ouverture. Je vous remercie.
Ensemble dans la sous-région et ailleurs, et travailler sur ces thématiques du commerce et de l'intégration régionale, mais pas seulement, nous avons aussi travaillé sur beaucoup d'autres choses. Et c'est toujours un grand plaisir pour nous, Enda, de vous recevoir ici à Dakar. Cela nous renforce, et en nous renforçant, nous mettons cette expertise que nous avons, ces capacités, au service de notre développement à tous, nos organisations respectives, et aussi pour, disons, l'évolution de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, plan économique comme sur d'autres plans. Je voudrais encore, au nom d'Enda, remercier notre partenaire dans ce dialogue, Africa, qui est un partenaire traditionnel depuis fort longtemps sur beaucoup de choses. Nous avançons ensemble, nous mettons ensemble nos ressources, nous mettons ensemble nos expertises pour essayer de pousser ces dossiers-là. Nous avons aussi la Fondation Commonwealth qui est une partie de ce dialogue, qui est partenaire également, qui a appuyé pour la réalisation de cet exercice. Au nom d'Enda, j'aimerais également les remercier. Je ne peux pas citer tout le monde, j'aurais un plaisir particulier à vous citer nommément pour remercier toutes et tous d'être venus. Encore une fois, j'espère que non seulement nous tirerons profit de ce dialogue, aussi bien au plan technique qu'au plan de nos capacités à faire avancer nos positions, mais j'espère également que votre séjour à Dakar vous permettra pour ceux qui viennent pour la première fois de connaître Dakar, pour ceux qui viennent pour la énième fois et qui ont déjà beaucoup de réseaux ici, de pouvoir en profiter pour dire bonjour à leurs amis et de profiter de l'hospitalité sénégalaise. J'espère que ces quelques jours parmi nous seront agréables. N'hésitez pas, lorsqu'il y aura quelques problèmes que ce soit, à vous adresser à nous, quel que soit le problème, pour qu'ensemble nous essayons d'y apporter des solutions. Voilà, merci. Je donne la parole à M. le Président.
Between our two organizations, that's Enda Tiers-monde and Tiers-monde Network Africa, but also in our work jointly in terms of developing the West African platform and developing trade and economic development expertise in West Africa. I'm very pleased that we're here as well, because I think that we may be discussing some of the issues that sometimes are not the headline stories in terms of the reporting or the economic journalism in our countries or about our region generally. We all know, and everybody says, we have been through a global economic crisis. We know that West Africa was hit very hard. People can talk about famine in Niger, but only talk about it in terms of drought and not relate it to the food crisis, which was part of our own particular experience of the sequence of crises that have affected the global economy. So one of the great advantages of this workshop here is that we intend to go beyond these headline discussions about the crisis and their effects to understand why it is that the crisis affected us in a particular way that it did. And I think that on that basis we will also be able to inform ourselves better about those same headline issues, about trade, about investment, about finance, about developing productive capacity in agriculture or industry, about services and so on. And on that basis gain a stronger understanding in terms of a regional approach to some of these questions which affect us all in our region. We have a common colonial experience, we also have a common post-colonial experience in terms of our role in the world economy as small countries, vulnerable economies and so on. And I'm particularly glad, I want to affirm again, that we are here not simply with the support and partnership of our long-standing colleagues, but new ones as well. It's particularly important for me that a member of the Senegalese Parliament is here, and not here simply as a participant, but as a committed person who has taken the chair and will be part of our proceedings. Like Sheikh, I also want to thank our colleagues, our new and old and now new friends from Commonwealth Foundation. Chef Latte is here, I'm sure he will speak for himself. But the key thing here is that in all these examples that I mentioned, it is the question of partnerships that we are forming. Partnerships in ideas, partnerships in action, so that we move closer to our dream. Many of you we have not met before, and we hope that we will not simply meet you, but also form new partnerships with you. I welcome you once again, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Guy-Kétanon. Comme vous l'avez dit, je pense que bien que le contexte de la rencontre déjà l'obligation de nous parler, l'obligation de réfléchir ensemble. Le monde, comme on l'a dit, je pense que c'est le monde des grands ensembles. La CEDEAO a l'obligation donc de réunir ces matières grises comme ONG, comme société politique, comme experts, pour mieux réfléchir pour le meilleur devenir de nos populations. Je pense que ça c'est un devoir que nous partageons tous. Et je m'en vais donc donner la parole à M. Seth Larry de Commonwealth. M. Larry, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by, first of all, recognizing our partners and the Federal Network. It's been, it seems quite a long time ago that we actually started a conversation on this particular initiative, and I think we've come a long way since the first conversations that Jeche and I had by email about 6 or 7 months ago. Trade and development issues are increasingly becoming part of the development discourse. And as a result of that, what we've done is we've undertaken it on ourselves to work in the different regions of the Commonwealth to provide support for various processes that are happening on these issues. We've already had meetings in the Caribbean, in Jamaica last year. We've had meetings in Johannesburg for Eastern Southern Africa. We just come back from the South Pacific in Samoa just last week. And in the autumn, we're going to have a meeting in somewhere in Asia, most likely in Kuala Lumpur, in Malaysia. So for us, this meeting in West Africa is actually quite significant in that it adds to the process, it adds to the global discourse on trade and development issues. One of the things I think that is emerging from these discussions is that business as usual is no longer an option for governments, no longer an option for civil society organizations. And obviously there's a need for more holistic approaches and participatory approaches to national development policies. And I mean, I know that a lot has happened in the West African subcontinent. And I think this meeting is quite significant again because for me and for the Commonwealth Foundation, what it seeks to do is it actually joins the dots and brings the various connections together from the different meetings. I mean, I know that something happened in Abidjan in February, you were in Bamako, Mali, just a few weeks ago. So bringing all these initiatives together and joining the dots and then coming up with a coherent follow-up agenda, I think is something that might be worth considering. So thank you all for being here. I mean, my job is just to sit here and listen and take notes and, well, chip in occasionally. But I will be, I can assure you that you have the support of the Commonwealth Foundation in any follow-up activities that you may decide to pick up. Thank you.
Comme plus avant de permettre à tout un chacun de se présenter et pour qu'on puisse, comme on l'a dit, mieux échanger, mieux se connaître et qu'au sortir de cette affaire-là, plus d'amitié, plus de fraternité, plus de cette relation puisse se nouer pour le mieux devenir de notre propre pays. Merci.
Bonjour encore une fois. Je m'appelle Cheikh Tidiane Gueye, je suis à Enda Tiers-monde. Et ici, sur certaines questions, je parlerai aussi en tant que coordonnateur de la plateforme de la société civile d'Afrique de l'Ouest sur l'accord de Cotonou, et aussi en tant que membre du comité de négociation de l'accord de partenariat économique. J'utiliserai au besoin plusieurs casquettes. Merci.
Oui, bonjour, mon nom est Enda, je travaille.
Mon nom c'est Pedro.
Merci. Mon nom c'est Pedro Hermes. Je suis de CACID, plateforme des acteurs de la société civile au Bénin. Merci.
Good morning. My name is Amadou Trav from the Gambia. I represent.
Good morning. My name is Seth Latte, the Commonwealth Foundation based.
Secretariat based in
Bonjour, je m'appelle Sibou Louba. Je représente le secteur général du syndicat des industriels du Sénégal.
I personally made sure that you'll get entertainment tonight, so by ensuring that the program closes before 6:30, so you can watch and support the Black Stars in the World Cup this evening against Germany. So that's my initial comment. Second one is to pick up from where Jacob left off. And he's absolutely right to say that the question of economic crisis is important to be viewed through a number of lenses. But in our case, the particular lens that is most relevant is first one of development, and two, the strategy and that our governments have embraced most of all to ensure growth and development, which is trade and trade liberalization, trade opening, as you mentioned. We all know about the global economic crisis. We all know the elements. So a fall in remittances, a fall in export earnings, deficits, countries going into deficits, pressures on currency values, exchange rate, and so on and so forth. So I don't really intend to go so much into the details of the crisis, except to bring up their implications for development, basically. Because it's important to say so, because in the discussions, in the official discussions of the crisis so far, even though the word development is used very often, I think that it is quite clear that that is not the primary motivation or the primary inspiration for the responses that we have had from official sources, whether international official sources like the G20 or the IMF, or indeed from many of our own national governments in terms of dealing with the crisis. So, for example, the key narrative, the key story that African leaders are saying about the crisis is this. First and foremost, this crisis was not of our making. We agree completely. But not only was it not of our making, up until the crisis broke out, we have done everything correctly. Everything you asked us to do, everything that is necessary to ensure stabilization of our economies. We have pursued austerity, We have opened our financial markets. We have liberalized our trade. We have cut back in terms of government intervention in the economy. We have built up our foreign reserves. We have freed our capital market so money can come in and out. We have done everything correctly. So for that reason, you should reward us. And your reward should be in two forms. First, be assured that we will continue to do what we have done before the crisis. So we will continue trade liberalization, we will continue financial liberalization, we will continue all those things. But second, you should give us a share of the stimulus packages that you are injecting into your own economies. Since the developed country governments made a commitment, which they have never met, by the way, to give 0.7% of their GDP as overseas development assistance to developing countries, and to Africa in particular, the demand of African governments, represented by the Committee of 10, which was set up in November 2008, of finance ministers and central bank governors in Africa, is that 7% of the stimulus that is being injected in OECD countries, advanced countries, also be given to developing countries and to Africa. Number two, that more financial assistance be given to them so that they are able to continue financing their trade and to meet some of their national budgetary and public finance deficits and so on and so forth. Now, in other words, it's not so much that the specific demands that they are making are necessarily wrong, but the assumption underlying those demands is that there will be business as usual. One of our colleagues here said that there cannot be business as usual. There ought not be business as usual. In fact, the greatest crisis for the last 60 years, which means the greatest crisis since Africa's independence. But at the same time, the African leaders, the world leaders are encouraging African countries to go on as if nothing has happened. They will reform their financial system. They will inject money directly into their productive sector. They will help their financial sector to readjust itself. But as for us, we shouldn't do any of that. We that exposed us to the worst effects of this crisis in the first place. So I want to touch on a couple of aspects of the crisis to illustrate my point about the worst effects of the crisis. First and foremost, there are many headline figures, but people sometimes should relate those to what it really means. In the first place, Africa in the year 2009 had a loss of trade earnings from export earnings of $251 billion. Now, in global terms, it may not be much. We are living in a world where the biggest governments have injected 21 trillion, as we speak, 21 trillion to stimulate the economy. Now, 21 trillion is enough to make all of Africa look like Washington, D.C., basically. And all that money has gone, and we don't know if we can't see any change. But 251 billion is about a third of total African trade, and it's a huge chunk of total African gross national product in any given year. So to lose that in 2009 and to lose a further 271 billion this year is a massive blow for the poorest continent on the earth. Secondly, if you calculate the overall effects of this, it has meant that Africa went from a growth, its total growth in the total economy of Africa in the year 2008 was 6.5%. Decent level of growth, the highest level of growth for a long time in Africa, but also it came on the back of a sustained upward growth curve, that the economies were performing better and better and better, well, in terms of their volumes or their values, they were performing better. In 2009 and now, those economies, the rate of growth has dropped to 2.2%. Sorry, 1.6% for Africa as a whole. In West Africa, it is 2.2%. In other words, the rate of growth has decelerated or has gone back by a magnitude of 3 times, 300%, basically. This is what has happened, again, in one of the poorest regions in the world, in one of the most densely populated regions in the world, and so on and so forth. Now, we can count the cost of many of these things, but I want to illustrate a number of points. If we say we want development, there are a number of things which are a guaranteed necessity. It is a guaranteed necessity that the only way you can develop is if you develop your production. If your production remains at the level of primary commodity produce, and not simply primary commodity produce, but particularly for export, then a number of problems arise. And it is those problems which led us to experience the global crisis in the particular form in which we experienced it. First, let's take the question of trade and trade losses. Most of Africa's exports, as we all know, are primary commodity exports. Most of the growth that took place were actually not because our productivity increased, not because we were able to produce the same volume of output at a cheaper rate or at a more competitive basis, but because of changes in somebody else's economy, the price of the primary commodity export that we specialize in went up. Oil is your classic case in point. We all know how the oil price went right through the roof up until the middle of 2008 before it began to collapse. But many other commodities underwent the same type of process. The first thing then that is said, that if you have a situation where all your growth is not based on an actual increase in your production, it's not based on the fact that your economies are diversifying, it's not based on the fact that there is more savings in your economy, that people are earning more income and they're saving more and you are mobilizing more money for investment. None of those were the factors that propelled growth in the first place. The growth was, if you like, a purely external accident, but the whole economy was geared around that growth. And once the crash hit, which we are now claiming that we had nothing to do, even though we specialized in supplying the markets in a way that when those markets collapsed, we had no other specialism to fall back on. We had no other recourse to fall back. So you have a situation where from boom, you went straight into bust. Once the demand for your export commodities fell, the price fell in a way that was fast, in a way that was steep and dramatic, and in a way that would definitely throw your economy out of balance completely. So the first thing about our primary commodity dependency is that, our primary commodity specialization is that it makes us dependent and vulnerable to external developments over which we have no control. And as long as that remains, and as long as we create an investment climate which is meant to promote those same primary commodity exports, as long as we create a trade regime which is meant to ensure that more and more of those same exports are sent abroad, then it means that we are locking in the rest of our economy and the entire policy instruments that we have into that same structure that we have. And it has important implications. One of the features of the crisis that people have noticed is that the moment that the export prices were going up, African currencies also the value of African currencies went very high. Because you were earning foreign exchange, people thought that you would be investing in your economy. If they buy assets in your economy with in your local currency, they can quickly make a lot of money. And because you have opened your economy wide open, they can make a lot of profit, take it out as quickly as possible. So another second related aspect is that apart from the vulnerability, we have a lot of instability. Money flows in, money flows out at such a pace that countries can crash in no time at all. A classic case in terms of this crisis is Nigeria. We all know that because of the oil price revenues, Nigeria was earning a lot of southern oil windfall. It got to a stage, I think, in late 2008, 2009, it had built up its foreign reserves up to 65 billion. Because the Nigerian stock market is wide open and the whole financial system and the whole capital regime is so wide open, a lot of foreign money, hot money, flowed straight into Nigeria, seeking to buy assets because the value of the naira was going up, seeking to buy assets in naira-denominated assets, knowing that as long as those assets were, the value was going up, they could quickly turn around, make money, and go out. At the same time, other people were plotting that if Nigeria has 65 billion lying somewhere, and then we'll come to the reserves question because that's another big problem in terms of the crisis in Africa, then it means that it has money to support its currency in case the currency goes up or down. So other people will speculate on buying the Nigerian currency to sell it. In the space of 3 days, I've forgotten which month it was, the value of the naira fell from around 174